man. Are you gonna like cue us up?
Oh, no, we're live. Hey guys, what's going on? James here, and welcome to a live stream. I told you guys on the community tab recently here that I did want to start doing some more live streams, kind of just getting some more content out there. Today, we have a lot of stuff to talk about. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers just cut their roster down to 53 players today. They went from 80 to 53 throughout the course of yesterday and today, and I am not alone in this conversation. With me today, joining me, my colleague here on YouTube. You know him, you love him. It's Billy from O and the C. Billy, how you doing today, man?
I was doing better before the Bucs came out with all their cuts. I got to be honest.
Yeah,
I was doing better.
yeah. That's
Bucs made me feel some type of way. That notification, by the way, was actually the notification of this video, of this live stream. Turn on your notifications, everyone.
See? Well, there you go. So look, we have a lot of stuff to cover, right? A lot of stuff to cover, Billy. I've got the list of all the cuts that the Buccaneers have made today here on my computer per Pro Football Focus. A shout out to them for that. I've also got Twitter up just in case if there's anything that we miss, because you never freaking know. But, Billy, there was a lot of crazy stuff that happened today, so I just kind of want to dive right in. We're going to do these in bunches of, like, 5, I think is a fair way to cover this, right? So the first 5 moves I want to talk about were quarterback Ryan Griffin was released from the team, wide receiver Cyril Grayson was waived, running back Patrick Laird was waived as well, guard John Mulshan, and then finally wide receiver Devin Tompkins. Billy, these first 5 moves that the Buccaneers made, what are your thoughts on those? Because Grayson, he was waived, what was it, Monday, I believe, or maybe even earlier than that. But Grayson was the first name of these guys that was waived, and then, of course, the other 4 names were waived or released today. What are your thoughts on this initial group of 5 here?
First of all, shout out to John Mulshan, right, friend of the channel, former MrBucsNation interviewee. I think we all knew Patrick Laird probably wasn't going to make the team, right? Very late signing, came on in the middle of camp. Definitely didn't expect. The odds were stacked against him, to say the least. With Ryan Griffin, I mean, the most tenured quarterback in Bucs history. Disappointing we didn't get to see the preseason superstar light it up this year, but I'm sure he will return to practice squad in classic Ryan Griffin fashion. Nobody holds a clipboard quite like Ryan Griffin. And the one that I think is the most disappointing for me, and I know you mentioned it, he was cut a while ago or waived a while ago, and he had the injury designation, with Cyril Grayson. I have grown, Cyril Grayson has come a long way in my heart ever since the ball doinked off his head. I believe it was against the San Diego Chargers in 2020. He's grown on me in his time with the Bucs, and I have positive memories of Cyril Grayson. So to see him go so early too was kind of a surprise.
Yeah, and real quick, Billy, I'm gonna address something in the chat here. Somebody said your audio is a little bit off, but while you work on that, let me go ahead and talk about some of the points that you made here regarding some of these cuts. So first, in the case of Ryan Griffin, this was a foregone conclusion, right? Ryan Griffin, he was not long for this team. Obviously with Blaine Gabbert, Kyle Trask getting all that work. Ryan Griffin, he's going to be a guy who is on the practice squad who gets elevated if they absolutely need him. But given all the depth at the quarterback position, yeah, Ryan Griffin wasn't going to make this team, folks. I know that he has a lot of fans out there, understandably so. Again, one of the most long-tenured players in Buccaneers history at this point. But, again, Ryan Griffin is one of the more understandable ones in that instance. But Cyril Grayson, like you said, Cyril Grayson is one of those guys who I thought was more heavily in the mix, right, for this 5th, 6th, 7th wide receiver spot. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But I thought that Grayson was going to be one of those guys who was going to be battling
definitely
more so for that spot, right? But was not the case. He was one of the first kind of guys that was cut. So that was a little surprising. Maybe they'll bring him back at the practice squad in some capacity. We'll have to wait and see on that. For Patrick Laird, he was a guy that was brought in late. Actually, one interesting thing to make note of, when I interviewed Rashad Wyatt here on the channel, he actually talked about his experience with Patrick Laird in the rookie minicamp and how Patrick Laird was kind of teaching him a few things about picking up the speed of the NFL, which I thought was kind of interesting. I think speaks a little bit more to Patrick Laird as just kind of a player more than anything, as well as just a human being. he could be an interesting guy, kind of like a Kenyon Barner type role, where he's just kind of that guy who's on the practice squad, maybe a guy you call up in certain situations, but I think he may have some type of role in the practice squad moving forward. Similar thing can be said with guys like John Mulshan and Devin Tompkins, both guys that weren't surprising, didn't make the 53-man cut there, Billy, but I also think could be developmental guys moving forward. John Mulshan, like you said, friend of the channel, he's been developing for the past couple of years, right? As a guard, as a center. He has been very versatile, and the Buccaneers coaching staff likes that in their offensive linemen. I could see his role continuing moving forward. Could he also maybe sign with another team's practice squad just because of that idea of possibly growing a little bit, like, not impatient, but just seeing what other opportunities are out there for him? That's a distinct possibility. We actually saw a similar situation like that, Billy, with Tanner Hudson, who just made the Giants' 53-man roster, by the way. So who knows? Obviously, the Buccaneers would like to keep John Mulshan on their practice squad, but he could also end up somewhere else, I guess I should say. Similar thing can be said for Devin Tompkins as well. This is a guy that had a lot of fans throughout the entire process, one of the more highly touted undrafted free agents that the Buccaneers had in this process. Did he lead college football in receiving yards? He was number 1 or number 2. I know Jarrett Stearns was the other guy who was high up there, and we'll talk about him in a moment, but a lot of people were actually calling for Tompkins to make the 53-man roster over guys like Scottie Miller or Rashad Perryman or Jalen Darden, which we'll talk about those guys definitely in a little bit as well. But Tompkins is another one of those young wide receivers who's a victim of circumstance. The Buccaneers have a very deep wide receiver room. It is what it is at this point, right? Like, it's just a good group of guys. So Devin Tompkins was a victim of circumstance in this instance, and he could be a candidate for the practice squad. I know I'm going to be saying that about a lot of these guys. Not a lot, but a handful of these guys. Thankfully, with the expansion of practice squads, it is, the team's benefit that they can hopefully keep a lot of these guys around, but it also wouldn't surprise me at all if Devin Tompkins latched on with another team's practice squad as well, Billy. But with that being said, do you have any kind of closing thoughts on this smaller group before we dive into the next one?
Yeah, no, and maybe I could help transition a little bit. Tompkins, I feel like a lot of our depth receivers are all of similar build, right? They're all smaller guys. Stearns, Geiger, and Tompkins are all kind of smaller guys, but they all kind of flashed some ability in the preseason. They all made plays, so it is, to see all three of them fall by the wayside, it's definitely a little disappointing.
Yeah, for sure. And that kind of ties into the next group. Like you said, it's a little bit of a segue here. In the next group, we have wide receiver Kaelin Geiger. We have undrafted wide receiver Jarrett Stearns. Recent 2022 7th-round draft pick, edge defender out of LSU, Andre Anthony was waived, Billy. Bug Howard was waived, I believe, yesterday or on Monday or a couple of days ago. And then also safety Troy Warner was waived as well. Billy, your thoughts on this next group of 5 in terms of the players that were waived?
Yeah, I would stick with, I thought out of I think there's a chance that Geiger, I'm hung up on Geiger. I feel like out of one of those receivers, I thought one of those smaller, it seemed like whenever Kyle Trask was in the game, all of our receivers were like 5'8", 5'9", 5'7", and under. And I thought one of those guys would definitely make it. They all had moments where you looked and you're like, yeah, okay, they seem like they might actually belong, especially, and I don't want to jump the gun and get too far ahead, but especially you saw not Stearns, but you saw return potential out of some of them. And I don't know how good I feel about our current return situation, but that might be a teaser for what we talk about a little bit later.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm sure we will obviously will talk about the returning situation here in a moment, but to kind of piggyback off what you said, Kaelin Geiger, Jarrett Stearns, those are two guys that, again, also had a lot of fans with Devin Tompkins. That trio of undrafted wide receivers, I thought had a lot of supporters, in the Buccaneers fan base and whatnot. For sure had a lot of fans for them. Unfortunately, neither one of the three made this 53-man roster. All showcased some pretty good things. All three probably made a pretty decent case to make this 53-man roster, but for one reason or another, they didn't get in that mix. In the case of edge defender Andre Anthony, this was an interesting one because, Billy, as I'm sure you saw throughout the preseason, Andre Anthony looked pretty good. He actually had 2 sacks throughout the preseason, which was not bad at all. very good numbers, very good stats, but much like what we've said in other circumstances, Andre Anthony was a victim of circumstance. He was a guy that, just was dealing with a really, really deep, edge defender group, essentially, right? So that is what that is regarding that situation. There was really nothing that could be done about that. Then in the case of Bug Howard, that one was pretty much foregone conclusion that Bug Howard wasn't going to be long for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers roster. And then similar things can be said in the case of Troy Warner. Both those guys, solid players. Maybe they'll have some type of role somewhere down the line, but doesn't seem like it'll probably be with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Billy. But the next group I want to mention here real quick involves wide receiver Vincent Smith, guard Sedarius Hutcherson, cornerback Kyler McMichael, safety Chris Cooper, and linebacker Gennard Avery. I have one guy that was technically supposed to be at this section of the list, Billy, but I'm going to save him for the final section of the list, which I deem as the most surprising grouping of guys there. So what are your thoughts on this group? Kind of a more lackluster group of guys of a more name recognition people, I imagine, right?
I think you absolutely nailed it with the term lackluster. I don't think anybody would be overly surprised to see these guys leave. Gennard Avery, also a late signing. I was actually thinking maybe he had a shot to make it, considering how late they went out and made the move to go grab him. It was right after we picked up Carl, if I'm not mistaken. But I mean, outside of that, McMichael, I wasn't. None of those guys to me jumped off the screen. The most significant thing I remember Hutchinson doing was in the last game. He got called for a holding penalty, and I believe he waved it off in disgust. I remember just because he was like, and I'm like, well, to you then, like, don't hold, bro. So definitely no one in that group that I would find overly surprising. I would consider the receivers, Tompkins, Geiger, Stearns, more surprising than any of those guys, to me, in terms of not making it.
Yeah, I think firstly, in the case of Bug Howard, I mean, I like Bug Howard personally, but he wasn't a guy who was going to be longed for this roster. It is what it is. Troy Warner, again, he's kind of more of an interesting guy. He has a history with the Buccaneers, right? He's been on the practice squad for the good portion of last year. He can be a guy that may be in that mix, at some point throughout the year. So we'll definitely have to keep an eye on him and kind of how he progresses and things along those lines. Then in the case of, certain guys like Vincent Smith, Sedarius Hutcherson, Kyler McMichael, these guys aren't necessarily, Chris Cooper, interesting developmental guys, but really guys who didn't do a ton, right? Didn't do a ton throughout training camp, throughout preseason. Kyler McMichael had a very up and down preseason, training camp, and whatnot. Sedarius Hutcherson was very quiet along the offensive line, I thought. Was very, very quiet along the offensive line, I thought. And then a similar thing could be said in the case of Chris Cooper, who was more quiet than normal, I feel like, throughout this process. I think that, he had some good things going for him, but again, just a really deep safety room. There just wasn't too much room for him. But I do want to kind of focus on Gennard Avery for a second here, Billy. Gennard Avery's an interesting guy. Formerly of the Philadelphia Eagles, was then released, or then I believe he eventually joined the Pittsburgh Steelers and then was released by the Pittsburgh Steelers. And one thing that I thought was interesting was the Buccaneers media had basically already kind of said, like, yeah, he's probably going to make the 53-man roster, and the Steelers media was very surprised that Gennard Avery was cut. So I was personally a little bit surprised that, Avery did not make this initial 53-man roster. Not to say he can't be brought back. I think that is definitely a strong possibility, and we may talk about some things here in a little bit, but Gennard Avery was an interesting one to me. I feel like he's going to provide some good special teams play and some good edge rusher depth. They decide to keep 5 edge rushing linebackers. What are your thoughts on Avery and what he was able to do for them?
Yeah, like I said, I mean, obviously limited opportunity coming in late, but I did think that there was a better than decent chance he would make it, because rarely do you see a team, I feel like, sign a veteran guy deep in camp and they don't make it. So like you kind of thought that they obviously saw there was a need there, and he still couldn't make it. So that was surprising. And like you said, the Steelers, the reaction of the Steelers media as well. It's interesting, but I don't. Am I upset that he's gone? Do I feel like it's going to hurt the team? Our special teams coverage is, to take your word, James, lackluster. So would his contributions helped? Couldn't have hurt.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think that definitely special teams play is going to matter for some of these backup guys, right? I feel like that's going to matter in a huge way, how some of these backup guys do and perform. And Gennard Avery was one of those guys, so we'll just kind of have to wait and see what his role is moving forward, whether or not he will be one of those guys that's in that equation moving forward in terms of special teams play. But Billy, next kind of chunk of the list I want to go to here, and this is the big one, right? I've been saving this part. This is the big part of the list. You have wide receiver Tyler Johnson, safety Nolan Turner, kicker Jose Borgelos, defensive lineman Benning Pote, and defensive back Logan Ryan. And this wasn't included in this part of the list here, but also linebacker Grant Stewart was traded from the Bucs to the Indianapolis Colts and a 7th-round draft pick in 2023 as well for a Colts 2023 6th-round draft pick. So your thoughts on this bigger list of moves that were made. First, let's kind of talk about the trade real quick. What do you think about Grant Stewart and him getting traded to the Indianapolis Colts, and Olakunle Fatukasi making the 53-man roster at this point?
Disappointed. It was cool to have a Mr. Irrelevant on our team. We may never live to see another Mr. Irrelevant come to the Bucs. Brian Suckup, I know, but that's not our Mr. Irrelevant, James. That's a OG Mr. Irrelevant that we snatched. I understand it though, because I actually think Fatukasi played really well in his time. He just felt like he flew around the field and just made a ton of tackles. So I could see why you would. I understand it, but it's disappointing because I felt like Grant Stewart was one of the only people who actually seemed to take pride in playing special teams. I'm not saying he was great or amazing or, oh my gosh, what will we do without him? But he was energetic and played special teams the way you would want to see someone play special teams. He seemed to love playing special teams, which I don't think enough people in the Bucs. I mean, we don't look like we enjoy playing special teams that much. So it was nice to see a guy out there with some enthusiasm and some life, covering kicks and running down on punts, blowing people up. That great commercial for Uber Eats. I'm a big Uber Eats fan. I enjoyed that commercial. Fantastic hair by Grant Stewart. And we didn't really it's not like we traded him for a ton, right? We gave up Grant Stewart in a 7 to get a 6, if I'm not mistaken. So, it's not like we got a haul back for him. If we would have traded him for a guard, maybe, I would have put a little bit different tone. But to me, it's kind of like, I'm disappointed. I miss Grant Stewart.
I'm a little bit biased, right? Some may say this, but Grant Stewart, another friend of the channel, somebody that we got to interview on here, I actually had to pull over into a Greek restaurant whenever I had gotten the news that I was actually on the phone with Evan Wanish of the Cannon Fire podcast, colleague of mine at BucsNation.com, and I was on the phone with him, and he said, oh, man. Well, first thing he said was Tyler Johnson got cut, and I went, oh, my gosh. And then 2 seconds later, he goes, oh, yeah, and Grant Stewart got traded. I went, what? And then I immediately had to pull over and record a couple of videos for the channel today. And my immediate reaction was I thought it was for an offensive lineman, a backup O-lineman, because the Colts, they've always had pretty good offensive line depth. I thought that was going to be a situation, and it would make sense, right? You trade Grant Stewart, good special teams guy, for a backup offensive lineman. It addresses a need, but it was just a trade-up in the 2023 draft, which leads me to believe that Grant Stewart wasn't going to make this roster. Because we've seen this all around the league so far today, where guys who would have been cut anyway get traded to teams who probably wouldn't have been able to get the guy on waivers. So that's the situation here. And it is disappointing. I've talked about it before. Grant Stewart, I think he is a special teams ace for this team. Might have even been a team captain for special teams play if enough opportunity was there for Stewart. But like you mentioned, Olakunle Fatukasi, he showed up in this preseason. And Grant Stewart, he was dealing with injuries. That was to his detriment. And Fadakasi ended up beating him out for that last roster spot, which is really unfortunate. I wish nothing but the best for Stewart in Indianapolis. Hey, the Bucs don't have to play him, so that's a good thing. Hopefully he can thrive over there in Indy. He's going to be a part of a great group over there. So I wish him nothing but the best. You don't mind, trading up a 7th to a 6th. That's fine. I feel like it is what it is. That's not bad at all. But like you said, Billy, yeah, Grant Stewart would be missed. In my opinion, I would have just kept all 5 linebackers instead of 7 wide receivers, which again, we'll talk about that in a moment. But another thing we need to talk about here, Billy, is Tyler Johnson, which is, a lot of people saying in the chat, this will also be uploaded as a podcast to BucsNation.com, Billy. And a lot of people obviously won't be able to read the chat, but Billy, Bucs fans are really upset about the Tyler Johnson cut. I mean, I think surprised is also another word that you can use. What are your thoughts on the Tyler Johnson cut?
Shocked. We had spoke about this earlier in the offseason, earlier in camp. We knew the receivers, that battle, was going to be something to watch. And we had talked about, who do we pencil in? Who do we think is going to make it? And the top 4, okay, got those to decide, especially right after Julio. Got those to decide. But then in that next kind of tier, you're looking at Perriman, you're looking at Scotty, you're looking at Tyler Johnson, Cyril Grayson, and you're like, I don't know. Tyler Johnson seemed like out of that bunch, the most likely to not even be worried. Seemed like he was, Tyler Johnson will make it for sure. And then as you watched him through the preseason, he easily was the most productive of that group in the preseason. He had not a game went by where Tyler Johnson didn't contribute. Now, Tyler Johnson, I feel like he really splashed on the scene as a rookie, deep down the depth chart, but sneakily made some plays. Then, you look last year, I felt like he had some inconsistencies, right? You heard about him coming into camp, a little questionable last year, and then he did have some drops throughout the season, and it felt like, okay, maybe he's not ready to step up and be that guy. But then you heard the flip side of that. This year, he came into camp with a different mentality, and you saw in the preseason, Tyler Johnson looked like about as good as you would want a 5th-string receiver to look. I mean, I don't know what the expectation is for a guy that far down the depth chart, but Tyler Johnson made plays in the preseason. So, to me, to see a guy like him not make it makes me feel like I don't know what was the standard? What was the expectation? Because Tyler Johnson is not, a 2nd-round draft pick or a 3rd-round draft pick competing to be the 3rd-string receiver. He's deep down the depth chart and was still able to go out there and have impact consistently. So, I don't know. It's shocking to me. And I never would have thought out of that group of people that he would be just the first to go.
One thing I do want to make a note of here is Greg Allman on Twitter had spoke about this from The Athletic, where he had said, one reason Tyler Johnson may not have been in the equation, at the end of the wide receiver depth is because of lack of special teams play. And in my opinion, I do get what he's talking about. And, you talked about the expectation for backup wide receivers, right? And it's got to be special teams play, right? Like, that's what you want guys that far on the depth chart to be able to contribute.
Sure.
And again, we will talk about it whenever we talk about some of the guys who did make this 53-man roster, Billy. But Tyler Johnson, he wasn't a punt gunner. Or if he was, it wasn't for very long. He wasn't a returner. He wasn't really anything along those lines. But I disagree with that notion that that's the only thing that, one of these backup receivers can contribute. I think that Tyler Johnson was a good 5th wide receiver for this team. He's a guy, especially with all the injuries that this team had sustained at the wide receiver position last year. He's a fill-in guy that can come in, get you through a game, and still provide you some really solid snaps and some good reps. A lot of people still remember that catch that he had against the Saints to really help put them over the edge and kind of ice that game.
Don't forget, too, James, that is, obviously, I think one of his most memorable plays as a Buck. The very next week, Tyler Johnson's the person who drew the pass interference penalty, the infamous PI against the Packers that ultimately sent us to the Super Bowl. That was a ball thrown to Tyler Johnson when Kevin King's tugging on his jersey. So, it's just surprising to see a guy who's been in that stage and been relevant for the Bucs in that stage just you say goodbye to him. Surprising.
Yeah. And we'll talk about more about the wide receivers who did make it, because there's a lot to unpack with just the wide receiver room alone. But to kind of put a bow on it, this was probably one of the most surprising move of the entire thing. Like you said, I thought Tyler Johnson was a lock to make this roster as the 5th wide receiver, given how his preseason had went, how the training camp had went. I know some people are going to point to the drop in the last preseason game whenever he caught a pass from Tom Brady. Billy, I talked to you about this before we got on here. The fact that Tyler Johnson was playing with Tom Brady at all should have been a good indication that he was going to make this 53-man roster over some of the other wide receivers that are on this roster still. So
he did also have a drop, I think, in week 2 of the preseason, if I'm not mistaken. I think he had a 3rd down drop, and then it came right back to him on 4th down, and he got the conversion, which is a lot of what Tyler Johnson showed last year, just that kind of inconsistency. He drops the easy ones, but makes the hard catches. So, but I don't think that that's enough to cut a guy who's so far down the depth chart. I mean, yeah, if that's your starting receiver, it's like, well, that's concerning. He's dropping balls that he should catch. When you're talking about a guy who's the 5th string receiver, yeah, like you have imperfections. You're going to have flaws when you get that far down the depth chart. So if the guy can make a crazy catch consistently, but occasionally is going to drop a slant, it's like, well, you could look the other way on that, in my mind.
Yeah, so I think that, to kind of put a bow on my point here, which hello to everybody in the chat, by the way, who are watching this on YouTube. And if you guys are enjoying this live stream, hey, go ahead and hit the like button. That'd be greatly appreciated as well. But, kind of put a bow on the Tyler Johnson take, Billy. It is pretty surprising. It's not what I would have done personally, and I do think it's a questionable move. For everybody who's saying this on YouTube, Tyler Johnson's going to end up with another team pretty darn quickly. Would not surprise me if the Lions got him and kind of put him into that mix, or some other team that needs a wide receiver picks up.
Think about a team like the Ravens. He could be like their number 2 receiver, number 3 receiver. And I think they would be gobsmacked at how good he is and the fact that we let him go. Like he would make plays for another team. And that's the thing that I think is so jarring about it, is he's a proven playmaker, which is hard to find, so and it just kind of walked away from that for, according the report you did, I think it was the tweet you referenced for special teams, which, we don't have any special teams to begin with. So you let a playmaker go to maintain a bad special teams unit. That's a head scratcher for me.
Yeah,
I don't know.
And just to kind of move on from that, now, Billy, some other guys that were part of this last group we're talking about. Speaking of special teams, kicker Jose Borregales, safety Nolan Turner, which, firstly, in the case of kicker Jose Borregales, Billy, he didn't win the kicking battle against Ryan Suckup. In my opinion, which a lot of people gave me flack for, not a lot of people, but some people gave me flack for. When he missed that game winner against the Miami Dolphins, I thought the kicking battle was over. He didn't make a 52-yarder against the Indianapolis Colts, I believe, and then after that, the writing was on the wall. But in the case of Jose Borregales, he's a guy that I'm sure the Buccaneers would love to have back on their practice squad, Billy. Just don't know if that's necessarily going to be an option. And then in the case of Nolan Turner, and then Benning Pote a little bit as well. Benning Pote, backup defensive lineman, has had some bright moments, but still a developmental, kind of raw defensive lineman at the end of the day. In the case of Nolan Turner, this is a guy that I really thought had a shot as a 5th safety. Guy who was a special teams captain at Clemson, actually looked pretty decent as a backup safety, and was hopefully going to give you some special teams play somewhere down the line, Billy. What are your thoughts on Benning Pote, Jose Borregales, and Nolan Turner not making this 53-man roster before we get to another big name that was released today as well?
My main thought on Pote is I want to give you a shout-out for just pronouncing that name correctly. That's a job well done.
I don't think it's right at all, but you know what? That's okay. That's just how I say it.
With Nolan, I was surprised because he played, I think, just to the naked eye. I don't have the statistical snap count breakdown, but I think he played more defensive snaps than anybody. He, in every single game, was always on the field. And it's surprising to see a guy get that much opportunity. And, I didn't see, not necessarily he flashed and made a ton of plays, but he also didn't get burnt or seem out of position or have a ton of negative plays either. And again, you referenced special teams captain at Clemson, but what is special teams in Tampa Bay? As far as Jose Borgelos, I think you're exactly right. Once he missed that kick, I remember Rondé Barber on the broadcast. That whole game was talking about how he was boasting that he could kick a 70-yard field goal. And it's like, well, that's great. But when push came to shove, you couldn't kick the game winner. And ultimately, we don't need you to kick 70 yards. We need you to kick like 50 and less when the game's on the line. And he shanked it hard, James. Like it was an ugly kick. And I agree with you. The second he missed that kick, it's like, what are we doing? Brian Suckup is a proven veteran clutch kicker. He kicked all the way through the postseason for the Bucs without missing a single kick. Hit a 52-yarder in the Super Bowl. What are we doing? Like, there's no point.
And I want to make an important note here for Borgelos, because I know some people have countered and said, well, Suckup can't kick 50-plus yarders. That's fine. You know, Borgelos has a more powerful leg than Suckup, right? But with Suckup, sure, he's more accurate. And that's what's more important here. Sure, Jose Borgelos can kick 50-plus yarders some of the time, you know, but he didn't kick a game winner in a clutch time situation. He didn't kick a 52-yarder, and it is tougher to kick 50-plus yard field goals, that's for sure. But I think Bruce Arians put it best when he said, hey, I want a guy who can make it, you know, 40 and under all the time, automatic, you know, or 45 and under all the time, automatic. That's the kind of kickers that you want, man, in my opinion. You know, in my opinion.
Can I jump in? This feels like a curse word in Tampa Bay Buccaneers history, but Matt Gay can kick it really far, too. I remember Matt Gay kicking a 59-yard field goal, and I also remember Matt Gay missing a chip shot to win us the game against the Giants. I would much rather have the kicker who's not flashy but is dependable than the guy who has the ability to blow me away and also break my heart, you know, and we've had so many kicker issues. Ryan Suckup has been the only thing to soothe those nerves when a kicker goes to kick. Why are we going to why are we going to mess with it?
Right. And I think, too, you know, you got to go with the established veteran who's been in situations before. Suckup's won a Super Bowl with the team now as a clutch kicker, making all of his kicks during that Super Bowl run. You got to go with Suckup in these situations. You know, you just have to. And I think that's really the only way to look at it. Jose Borgelos, not a bad kicker. May end up on a different team somewhere down the line, but, you know, or may end up on the Buccaneers practice squad, but I don't think he's ready quite yet. You know, like I said, once he gets more like automatic from 45 and under, then and is able to hit game winners and things along those lines, that's where you kind of look at those situations and go, okay, that looks good. You know, kicking 50-yarders is a nice plus, but if you're missing half of them, then what are we doing? You know, that's kind of my question there. But Billy, the last move I want to talk about here, before we get into some cuts around the league, as well as some of the people who did make the Buccaneers roster, is I want to talk about Logan Ryan. And this is a situation that I know a lot of people are, hesitant about, right? Because right now the expectation is that Ryan Jensen, he is technically counting on the Bucs 53-man roster. Come tomorrow, though, Jensen will be placed on the injured reserve, so he has a chance to come back later on in the season. If he was placed on the injured reserve today, he would be out for the entirety of the season. If it's tomorrow, okay, the Buccaneers can bring him back later in the year. They got rid of Logan Ryan today because Ryan Jensen's still here. The expectation is that they will bring him back tomorrow. Thoughts on that situation?
I'm not mad at it. I was surprised to see him get cut, but then once I heard the explanation of why he got cut, it made sense to me. I guess the best news out of it is to hear that Ryan Jensen, I've never seen an injury with like so much, so cloudy, so murky. You know, they just don't release a lot of information about what's going on with Jensen. But it is nice to hear that they're feeling like there's a chance that he'll come back at some point this year. Hopefully it's not quite like a Vita Vea situation from a couple years ago where he couldn't come back literally until the NFC Championship game. Hopefully he could come back sooner. I think obviously Jensen is a colossal loss. Appreciate Logan Ryan being a pal. But if that's what the Buccaneers have to do to make sure that there's a chance that Ryan Jensen can come back, then I'm glad to hear that they think that there's a potential opportunity that he would be able to midway through the season or later on in the season be able to get back out there.
Yeah, I think that, again, like, obviously there's some level of risk involved in that because you got to ask the question, what if Logan Ryan doesn't want to come back? Of course he will probably want to come back, but like you said, I was a little surprised that they opted to do that rather than, say, get rid of a wide receiver or something along those lines. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But, it was a little bit of an interesting situation. But like I said, after it was explained, like, oh, he's going to come back after Ryan Jensen's placed on the IR. It's okay. It's not really a big deal. It is what it is. So all in all, Billy, in terms of the cuts, what were the most surprising ones to you? Because for me, the Grant Stewart trade I thought was pretty surprising. The Tyler Johnson cut I thought was pretty darn surprising as well. Logan Ryan had that initial surprise to it, but then things obviously got a little bit better. But aside from that, like, that's kind of like Gennard Avery was a little surprising to me. Maybe Andre Anthony, some of the wide receivers. Kind of what were the most surprising moments to you out of all these roster cuts, and really the moves period that the Bucs had made? Because I think keeping 7 wide receivers was not something I thought that they were actually going to end up doing there.
The most surprising people who are no longer on the team, I think you capped it perfectly. Grant Stewart and Tyler Johnson. I really think if Grant Stewart doesn't pull his hamstring in the first game, I think he's probably still on the team because Fatukasi doesn't get the opportunity he got. And credit to him for taking that opportunity and really maximizing it. I think he made Grant Stewart look replaceable, which is a credit to him. It's a shame for Grant Stewart that, an injury kind of snipes your opportunity. And obviously Tyler Johnson, that is shocking. But the most shocking move, and if I could, again, I'm trying to segue us here, the most shocking move to me is actually the move that they didn't make. And I feel like, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, you know where I'm going. Scotty Miller being on the roster still is, I would say it's jarring, James. I would use the term jarring. Your thoughts?
Yeah, in the case of, and now we're going to kind of dive into that segment of, guys who are still on this roster, right? That may be a little bit surprising. Scotty Miller making this roster. By the way, the chat on YouTube's been going crazy, right? In terms of the Scotty Miller, Tyler Johnson debate. Jalen Darden thrown in there as well. Rashad Perriman's thrown in there as well. Let's talk about the wide receiver group for a second, right? Rashad Perriman, Jalen Darden, Scotty Miller made this roster, okay? Firstly, in the case of Rashad Perriman, maybe I'm a little bit, but also, Nicholas, I see you in the chat. Yeah, you told me, okay? Look, there's a lot of Scotty Miller fans out there. First, let's talk about Rashad Perriman. This one isn't as crazy, I think, because of the fact that Rashad Perriman's a vet. He's been around the team since 2019. He's about to be 29 years old. He offers a good blend of speed and size. And me and you have talked about that. I think that Rashad Perriman is probably that 5th wide receiver right now. Probably. I think he offers a good rotation with the guys who are presently there. Maybe that's why they decided to cut Tyler Johnson, because they have a guy who has the same blend of size and speed, and maybe even a little bit faster than Tyler Johnson, and Rashad Perriman, who is more of an established vet. Maybe. I don't know. But in the case of Rashad Perriman, wasn't necessarily too surprising to me personally that he made this 53-man roster. I mean, the only surprising part about it was that he was dealing with injuries throughout this entire preseason and training camp. I thought that was going to kind of be the nail in his coffin, kind of like what you talked about with Grant Stewart. But what was more surprising to me was Scotty Miller made this roster. And I know that there are a lot of Scotty Miller fans out there, and I don't blame you guys. Scotty Miller is an exciting player whenever he does get those opportunities to go on the deep balls and make those clutch plays. It's always exciting when Scotty Miller catches one of those deep passes, right? But in terms of wide receivers that give you more of a balance, I don't think Scotty Miller was as good of a guy as maybe Tyler Johnson. That's my thoughts and opinions on that. When I look at what Scotty Miller can do for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Billy, I think a lot of times it's just go and get the deep ball after he gets behind his man. Again, not a terrible thing, but whenever you look for more in-depth wide receivers, you look for guys who have got speed, balance, are able to run different kinds of routes, not just one, maybe a couple of different types of routes, have got size. And Scotty, he's got speed, and he's got the deep route, just the deep straight route. Those are the two things he's got going for him. You know, you talked earlier about special teams play. Scotty Miller does have more special teams experience than Tyler Johnson. I've got to give him credit for that. He was a punt gunner last year, and he did recover a fumble, I believe, right, on a punt at some point last year or a couple of years ago.
He actually got two.
Exactly.
He recovered a muffed punt, I believe, against the Colts, and a fumble he was involved in forcing a fumble against the Eagles in the playoffs, if I'm not mistaken. 2 times he was involved in a fumble on punts.
Right. So in that circumstance, I get that he has more special teams experience than Tyler Johnson. I just thought it was time, man, you know, and it could still be. We don't know what other moves are going to happen around the league. You know, the Buccaneers can sign players coming tomorrow, which we will talk about that in a little bit as well, Billy. I just thought it was finally time for Scotty Miller. I thought the wide receiver depth was really good. You saw the undrafted free agents coming out there and making some plays in that first preseason game, like Tompkins, like Geiger, like Stearns. If I'm being honest, Billy, Scotty Miller was pretty quiet throughout the entirety of this training camp and this preseason as well. Tyler Johnson had some good plays as well. People point to the drop from Tom Brady in this last preseason game. People forget that Scotty Miller had 2 drops throughout this preseason. One on an out route from Blaine Gabbert, one on a deep ball from Blaine Gabbert as well. So whenever you take all of this, you combined all of it, it is a little puzzling, in my opinion, to see that Scotty Miller made this 53-man roster. I know I might get flamed in the chat for that, but what are your thoughts on it? By the way, before I do get your thoughts on it on the YouTube side of things, I do want to thank Charles for the $5 super chat saying, I think cuts were made with taxi squad in mind. I imagine that's practice squad. Tyler Johnson's the only one who should get signed by somewhere else. We will have to wait and see on that, obviously. We'll be covering that on all platforms moving forward here with the Bucs. But Billy, thoughts on Scotty Miller making this 53-man roster, as well as Rashad Perryman?
Yeah, I'll start with Perriman. You've covered Scotty pretty good there. I'll hit on that too. But starting with Perriman, the one thing you didn't mention, which I think is super relevant because you mentioned it with Tyler Johnson, Rashad Perriman gives us no special teams assistance. Man doesn't play special teams. So that was the whole reason Tyler Johnson couldn't make it, or a part of the reason Tyler Johnson couldn't make it. And Perriman also gives you nothing on special teams, which I find interesting. Now, I like Perriman. I think Bruce Arians, too, really loves him some Rashad Perriman. So I think that really weighs in to the decision. I know Bruce isn't the head coach anymore, but I think that weighs in. But I have a lot of happy memories of Rashad Perriman. So, like, I enjoy the fact that he made the team. I still remember, you know, like you mentioned, he was on the team the first go-around, 2019, when everybody was down at the end of the season, and Rashad Perriman was just making miraculous catches all over the field, and he was looking like, wow, this guy's really good. And then, of course, he left, and then he came back and got the game winner against Buffalo. One of the better games of the year last season. So I do have happy memories of Perriman. Glad to see him, you know, make the team. Welcome him back with open arms for sure. Scotty, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. He's just – I love Scotty Miller. Like, Scotty Miller's awesome. Gave me one of the happiest individual moments of my Buccaneers fandom, right? As happy a moment as I can encapsulate in one singular play, Scotty Miller gave me that. But – he's limited, and he's painfully limited because you want to see a guy. He plays hard. You want to see him. You know, he's tiny out there. You want to root for him. He's the little guy, little scooter, and you know he is, like you said, he's got speed for sure. He has no type of size. Doesn't have strength. His versatility in terms of what he can bring to an offense is even less than what you would think it is on paper, because other players who are built like him with his stature are usually guys you see get the ball on screen passes, some shorter routes, and then they're able to make guys miss and get some yards after the catch. You don't really see that from Scotty Miller. A lot of the time, when he does catch the ball, he's going to the ground to secure it. He's much more comfortable, the way Mike Evans used to be for the slightly older Bucs fans, right? Mike Evans used to catch the ball and immediately go down. He would just catch it and grip it to the ground. Scotty Miller has a lot of that in his game, so he doesn't get you that yak. Really, his biggest contribution is I'm fast, and I can run faster than you that way. And if I beat my guy and the ball's laid out in front of me, we can get 40 yards. Or I can flop because I'm small. We get a nice little PI penalty, right? But his individual performance in the preseason, and I was rooting for him, right? I want to see Scotty do well. I want to see him make the team. But his performance was abysmal. I mean, he was shockingly bad. You know, when you had guys like Tyler Johnson contributing consistently. You had Tompkins, Geiger, Stearns all having moments where they looked the part, right? You had Scotty Miller just dropping passes, relatively uninvolved, didn't really differentiate himself from the pack. And I, like you, I was sad because I like Scotty Miller, but I was like, I think, like you said, it might be time. It's unfortunate because in Buccaneers lore, Scotty Miller will go down as a hero, But, there comes a time where, because of the depth, and it's a blessing and a curse, you have so much depth at the top, it's hard for guys to crack the bottom, but because of the depth, it's like, where does he fit? What does he bring? With Perryman, he's got the speed that Scotty has. I think Perryman ran like a 4.3 coming out of college or something like that. Obviously super fast, but he's like almost, half a foot taller than Scotty Miller. So he has a second level of his game. Scotty Miller is very physically limited, and I give him credit. Like when I think it was about halfway through last year when they said they were going to put him on special teams as a gunner, I thought it was ridiculous. I'll be honest, because I'm like, how can he tackle someone? He's so small. I'm like, Scotty Miller's smaller than us, James. I'm like, how is he going to go and wrap somebody up? And he does play hard, and on special teams, he was involved in 2 turnovers, which is incredible. I mean, that's more than I would have ever thought Scotty Miller would give you on special teams. So I give him credit. And I remember, like, he had the quote last week where he talked about he was ready to, or I think it was last week where he was ready to fight for his spot, And I love that mentality, but to me, looking at it, he didn't earn it. And I would have loved to have seen him like have a big game, and really solidify his spot and say, no, like I should be here. I deserve this. But he didn't earn it. He didn't do anything in the preseason that made you say, that's the guy, Scotty, way to go. He didn't have that moment. So to me, you look at like who's more deserving. It almost feels like maybe like the Buccaneers had it predetermined in their mind. Like Tyler Johnson is not going to beat out Scotty Miller unless Scotty Miller falls off a cliff and Tyler Johnson is unstoppable, because that was close to what happened and it didn't affect the result at all. So to me, it's tough. And you didn't mention Darden. And if I could swing us to Darden, we've talked about Darden before, and you and I we're in lockstep on Darden. I don't know what Jalen Darden brings to the team that is irreplaceable or can't be brought by another player. But I mean, again, Tyler Johnson versus Jalen Darden, who do you want to throw the ball to, or who do you want to be on the team? What is Jalen Darden's role? I know he's the return man. He's really good at, fair catching it or catching it, moving to the side and falling down. But other people, I think, could fall down on special teams. If we needed somebody to fall down, I think other people could fall down. And I didn't see Darden, to me, although I do think he's a better route runner than Scotty Miller, similar size guys, I do think he has the ability to slow his momentum more than Scotty, break down and come back, or break down and come over the middle. Whereas Scotty, when he gets up to a full head of steam, it is very hard for him to change direction. He's blazing. But like Darden, to me, he's so small, he gets bodied a lot. Like there was a small play, super small play, but it was either against the Colts, I think it was against the Titans, and it was Darden running like a deep end, and the ball was put on the money by Trask right here, and he tried to box the guy out, and it turned out to be a drop because the guy just pulled his shirt, but it was the smallest tug, you could say interference or hold, but it was the smallest tug, but Darden got like thrown because he just doesn't have any weight to his frame, so a corner giving him the slightest nudge just threw him, and I don't know. That's hard to overcome. Smaller players in the NFL, especially at a position like receiver, you got to be really special. Like there's a lot of smaller players in the NFL now, more than what there were like 10 years ago or 20 years ago. But it takes away from the fact, like, you got to be special to play in the NFL at a smaller stature. It's a big man's game. So you have to have some sort of superpower if you're going to be small that can make you great. And I don't see that from Darden. And James, I would love for you to just go off and give me some Darden takes right now.
In the case of Darden, I was a big fan of Darden coming out of the draft, myself and Evan Wanish, but man, it hasn't taken me long, for me to go, oh no, what is happening? Because Darden's one of these guys which he's looked great in shells, but as soon as the pads come on, he kind of disappears. And
Yeah.
one of the biggest things he was brought in for was kickoff and punt returning, right? And I think everybody can say this, and on YouTube here we've got the chat going.
How does the chat feel about Darden?
Darden hasn't been. It seems like the chat is more in agreement here that Darden has not been the best, right? And as a returner, has not been very good. And I know part of it is because our special teams unit as a whole isn't that good. But one thing I think that has always been frustrating with Darden in his returning ability since last year, obviously, throughout his rookie year, was the fact that the dude just falls down a lot. Whenever he returns the football, he just seemed very ineffective. And you could see the difference last year when they made the change from going to Jadon Mickens last year to Jalen Darden. There was a noticeable change, I feel like. And to be fair, the people that the Buccaneers had in this group of guys returning kicks and punts, Rashad Wyatt, Devin Tompkins, Kaelin Geiger, none of those guys really did anything either worth of note. But we still didn't see a lot from Jalen Darden throughout the preseason that gave me an indication that he has improved as a returner. And I know he's a 4th-round draft pick from last year's NFL draft. You got to give the guy a chance, and that's fine. I understand that. But I'm also kind of a little bit waiting on this, man. I'm a little bit tired of saying, okay, it's returning. Why can't he put it together right now? And I'm going to say this, a lot of people trash Kyle Trask, right? Same draft class as Jalen Darden. At least Trask has shown growth and improvement so far up to this point. We haven't seen a lot of this at all from Jalen Darden. And that's not a great sign in my opinion. So unless Darden really starts to get the ball moving and really start to show some improvement, I'm going to have concerns about him making the 53-man roster over a guy like Tyler Johnson, over a guy like Cyril Grayson, over a guy like any of the undrafted wide receivers. And I know that sounds crazy. It's like, come on, James, he was a 4th-round draft pick last year. Well, one thing you've got to be willing to do is, hey, if a plan's not working out, you got to be willing to move on from it. It is what it is. And right now, I'm a little bit sour on Darden. I'm not saying he can't redeem himself. Not at all. And I think if he was waived, probably would have gotten picked up by another team. But just right now as it stands, Darden hasn't done a lot to impress me. So I completely understand where people are coming from with the groaning of, oh man, Jalen Darden made this roster. I can understand why there's some of that groaning there because it's getting a little iffy in terms of Darden and his growth and development and whatnot, Billy. But
he made it over Tyler Johnson. I mean, if you just take Scotty out of it, take Perriman out of it, you kept Jalen Darden over Tyler Johnson. Who contributes more to winning? Because Jalen Darden brings no contribution towards winning. Anyone can go catch a punt. It's not hard to find a guy who can catch a punt, especially if you have no expectation for him to run with the punt. If he just has to go catch it, and a lot of people can go catch it. Tyler Johnson brings at least something. And I'm not saying he's great, but he does contribute something to the field. We could put him out there and rely on him to make a play. Jalen Darden ran back punts. I just mentioned this to you earlier. Jalen Darden ran back punts and kicks for an entire year, and I watch every Bucs game very closely. And I could be forgetting one, but I don't remember a good return. There's not one play where I'm like, boom, okay, wow, that was a great run back. I remember people having good run backs against us. I don't remember, a single Jalen Darden flash play. The only play I actually distinctly remember was against Washington when he got the ball thrown to him and it was an interception because Tom Brady hit him perfectly and he decided he wasn't going to catch it, took his eye off the ball, threw it up in the air, and it got picked. So, to me, I don't know. I struggle with Tyler Johnson versus Jalen Darden. How you could tell me Tyler Johnson brings less to help a team win than Jalen Darden does.
Yeah, and that isn't to say that Jalen Darden can't change his trajectory. Hold on, sure. Billy. I'm going to go ahead and add Evan Wanish here. He's calling on the phone right now, so we're going to go ahead and put him on speaker real quick. Oh, okay, never mind. He hung up. So if he calls back, we'll try and get him on there on the phone here. But That isn't to say that Jalen Darden cannot improve, right? I hope he does.
Absolutely.
But right now, it's just not been a good situation, right? And you hope that Darden can improve, because if not, yikes. Yikes is the best word that I can use to describe Darden if things don't improve. But Billy, a couple of other guys that made this roster before we again finally shift gears into guys who can make, or who other guys who did make this 53-man roster. Olakunle Fatukasi, we already talked about him already. Guy who was really solid in terms of preseason, made a ton of tackles, right? I was able to showcase some really, really good skills there. And I thought he did some good work. Were there any other surprises for guys that made the 53-man roster from your perspective there?
Yeah, if I could throw one out there that nobody seems to be talking about, so maybe I was the only one who was a little bit worried. But with the greatness of Rashad Wyatt, and I think a lot of Bucs fans are on board that Rashad Wyatt, definitely a great pick, looks tremendous. I'm really surprised that the boy, Giovanni Bernard made the team. I was kind of worried that there was a chance that Gio was kind of not replaceable, but essentially replaceable, because Rashad Wyatt, obviously we know Leonard Fournette's taking a bulk of the carries anyway, but Rashad Wyatt, he looks like he's ready to take Leonard Fournette's job, let alone Giovanni Bernard's job. So I was kind of surprised, especially when he didn't play in the last preseason game. He was held out. I was a little surprised. I kind of was worried that he wasn't going to make the squad.
For Giovanni Bernard, that is.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. So actually, real quick, I'm gonna go ahead and bring Evan Wanish into this room, because that's what he was texting me about. So we're gonna bring him in for a little bit and see what's going on here with Evan, so we can have a trio here of people going off talking about all the cuts that were made and whatnot. So here we go. 1 second, Evan, are you here, sir?
If you would ever look at your phone, I would have been here a lot sooner. So,
well, sometimes things happen in life that are just out of our control. But Evan, you joined just in time. We were actually talking about Giovanni Bernard and him making this team. What were your thoughts on Gio Bernard and him making this 53-man roster?
Well, they ended up cutting Logan Ryan as that paper move type thing. I thought that guy, instead of Logan Ryan, could have been Giovanni Bernard, because it's a similar situation for him if they would have cut him. Didn't mean he wouldn't have came back, but I kind of always expected them to carry 4 running backs, because I'm not sure if they want to hand the reins over to Rashad Wyatt to be that third down back immediately. Mm-hmm. So I think early on, I've said this on the Campfire podcast, which I'm the co-host of, go check that out. And I've said this on a bunch. I don't think you're going to see Rashad Wyatt early on be the exclusive third down running back. I think early on it could be Giovanni Bernard, and it wouldn't surprise me. The Bucs know what they have in Bernard. He's a veteran who just does his job. So I don't really think it was that big of a surprise. I expected Keyshawn Vaughn. Keyshawn Vaughn ran the ball well, so I wasn't surprised that 4 running backs were kept, and obviously Giovanni Bernard was that one guy who maybe could have been a surprise cut.
Yeah, no, for sure. I gotta agree with you there. I think that given, Vaughn had a good I think overall Vaughn did better than I thought he was gonna do, especially in the last preseason game. But I think White was kind of the big indicator, right, as to whether or not Bernard was gonna make this roster or not. White did showcase some good stuff, but I guess they still feel comfortable carrying 4 running backs. Like you said, solid veteran.
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
Keyshawn Vaughn, I feel like he is so slept on. He never gets a ton of opportunity, but in small stints of opportunity, he is successful. I know I remember last preseason he had the back-to-back fumbles, which was ugly, and he even fumbled in the playoff game against Washington. He definitely has his flaws, but he does step in every now and again and produce for the Bucs. I feel like a lot of Bucs fans always hate on Keyshawn Vaughn, and I'm like, I get it. He's not amazing, but he carries his own. He was the starter for the Bucs against the Eagles, which granted we just ran him off the field anyway in the playoffs, but he toted the rock. for the Bucs. Like he's a respectable backup running back. I feel like
I couldn't know one man in the world who hates Keyshawn Vaughn personally. Never met a man that hates Keyshawn. Isn't that right, Evan? That's right. Yeah.
I don't. So let's get this out of the way. I don't hate him personally. I don't have an issue with Keyshawn Vaughn personally.
Yeah, okay? No, that's true.
I just, and I'm gonna disagree here. I just don't think he's very good at football. Like that. That's all. Like, I just don't. No, I mean, I'll give him credit. To me, yeah, he did run hard in the preseason. He looked good. Probably looked like their best running back against Tennessee, and even against Indy, he had some nice runs. Got in for the touchdown, but I mean, you need to do that more consistently to me, and just I think his real value that they were trying to make him be was kind of that pass catcher, kind of like a Leonard Fournette type, to where you can run between the tackles, but you can also catch passes. And I mean, he can't do it. Like he's not a pass catching running back. And even when he does catch the pass, it looks awkward. So I understand. I would have kept him on the roster too. It's not like I would have cut him or anything, because depth is depth. But I just, admittedly, I'm not the biggest Keyshawn Vaughn fan, but I mean, I do understand people that don't think he's got enough opportunities, because I mean, he was a 3rd round pick 2 years ago, and he's only started a handful of games because of Leonard Fournette, because of Ronald Jones, because of those types of circumstances. So I understand the feeling that maybe he is a little bit, underutilized.
Real quick, Evan, I want to get your thoughts on this, because you were texting me the entirety of the time we did talk about it. Thoughts on Tyler Johnson getting cut, Jalen Darden, and Scotty Miller making this roster? And Rashad Perriman, for that matter.
Yeah, the more I thought about it, the biggest thing that Miller had over Johnson was the special teams, and I know you guys talked about that. Miller played special teams. Johnson did not. That's a big key factor there. And Todd Bowles has talked about that. They were looking for gunners. They were looking for guys who could contribute on special teams. That was clearly a big thing for them. And the bigger surprise, though, to me is keeping Rashad Perryman over Tyler Johnson, because not really Perryman's fault, but Perryman was injured for 80% of training camp. Like he barely played. The first time he got into game action was against Indy. He didn't really do anything. And I feel like now with the practice squad rules, where you can have veterans, on your practice squad, he would have been a pretty good candidate to probably, I doubt anybody would have signed him, like if they just cut him, and he probably could have came back to the practice squad. Whereas Tyler Johnson's case, he's likely to be picked up off waivers, I think, by somebody.
Yeah, no doubt.
I think you could have kept Perryman on your practice squad and still had Johnson on your roster, because Perryman doesn't play much special teams either. So that's the bigger one to me. Now, I heard you guys talking about Jalen Darden, and you mentioned it, James. To me, they were never cutting a 4th round pick that, if you remember, they traded up to get. They traded up to get Jalen Darden. And I remember I called it the best draft pick of that draft for the Bucs.
Me and you were hyped about Jalen Darden.
Hey, Noah Spence is still good. He got cut by the Bengals today.
That's
so
fact. That's fact.
If you need pass rush depth, I'm just saying, there's a guy. The Bengals aren't serious about winning. That's what that shows me.
That's facts.
But yeah, so I think about, like I said, Darden, he has a role. Has he been great at that role? No, he has not been great at that role. You can't really defend that. He hasn't been great at that role. The one thing I will say about that, and I feel like this is the case with every punt/kick returner, they kind of get a bad rap, because like there's only so much you can do when you catch the ball and there's 3 defenders right in your face because the blocking isn't good enough. There's only so much you can do. And I see that a lot of times with the Bucs, kick and punt coverage. It's not great, and that's been an issue for a while, I think. So, it's tough, but Darden has a role. He didn't. So would I have done it? No, I would have kept Tyler Johnson. And it was a real surprise that he was cut. But to me, the more questionable one is the Perryman versus Johnson thing, rather than a Miller or Darden.
Yeah, no. I completely get where you're coming from with that.
I would like say he does. I agree that he technically has a role, and it is important for everybody to fill out the spot on the depth chart or have a role so that you could diagnose this is what you're doing. But it's not even, and I also agree with Buccaneers special teams. I mean, wow, it's forgettable as can be. But he doesn't even he's so uninspired in his role. He doesn't look like he's like, I can't wait to return this kick. It's more like, got to return another kick. Got to fall down to the left or fall down to the right. And I'm just like, at least take a big hit. Run into somebody. Try a juke. Instead, it's almost as if he's not wearing cleats. And I don't, I'm not saying he doesn't have a role. And obviously I'm saying he's not good in that role. But I would say, of course, there's a part of him being bad in that role is the people around him not helping him in the slightest. But he doesn't even look inspired to be in that role. And I guess that's what bothers me. Is like he doesn't inspire any confidence in himself. He just looks very lackadaisical. And that to me is also part of why I don't. Of course, I agree. They're not going to cut him because he's fresh to the team and he does have a role. Technically, he's a part of special teams, but he doesn't even like Scotty Miller running down to cover a punt. I mean, at least he's got enthusiasm. He's running hard, even though he's got two people just jamming him off the ball and he can't, he can't go anywhere, but he's running hard.
Right. And
Darden, he's got no zest.
I think that this is a big year for Darden. This isn't a year where he just can be unproductive again. He can't afford another year like last year, for sure. Because if he is, I think the Bucs could even make that change midseason. Maybe. I think you have to be productive to earn a roster spot for the 2023 team. I don't think it's going to be given to him kind of like it was this year. Sure. Because after 2 years, you kind of lose that lust of being a draft pick.
Yeah.
So, this is a big year for Darden in the return game, especially since, unless more injuries pop up, he's not likely to see a ton of time at receiver. And I actually liked what we've seen from him at a receiver in the preseason. He caught that first touchdown from Blaine Gabbert. I like what they've seen from him at receiver, but he unfortunately that's not going to be his role. Like he's not going to get involved that way. So how you're going to make a name for yourself on this roster is by special teams, and that's where he needs to be. You don't have to be special, but you have to be better. Like you have to every now and then take a return to the 40. Take a return to the 35. It doesn't have to be a big time, special play this entire, every single time, but not asking him to be Devin Hester, but
I mean, Evan, that's why they call it special teams. So I mean, I don't know what you're talking about. So
I get. Well, the Bucs don't believe in special teams. So
let me ask you guys.
Besides the kicking game, the Bucs don't believe in special teams.
Let me ask you guys this. First, in the case of Scotty Miller, Evan, you talked about it. The guy's a punt gunner. And this is actually a good point to kind of dive into the next segment, and really kind of the last segment I want to talk about here before we go ahead and end off, because we've already been going for over an hour on here. Other teams made roster cuts throughout the day as well. A lot of different types of players got cut from a lot of different types of teams. When you guys take a look at all the other cuts that were made around the league, are there any names that jump off the page? Because people have been talking about this throughout the entirety of preseason. Hey, when other teams make their cuts, special teams guys, maybe the Bucs will look into it. Offensive linemen, maybe the Bucs will look into it. Are there any names that jump off the page to you guys in terms of roster moves that other teams made, the Buccaneers may look to add that could result in maybe a guy like Scotty Miller getting cut, or maybe a guy like a backup linebacker or something along those lines getting cut? Just kind of what are your guys' thoughts on those situations?
Two names that just popped off to me. One of them more boring than the other. Joe Hague, and I told you about this, he got cut, and I could see the Buccaneers reaching for depth and going back to a familiar face, even though it's not exciting, and I don't see him challenging for a starting spot. We're like one injury away from crisis mode. So, it might be nice to get some familiarity, a guy who knows the team, knows the plays, get him back. And Alex Leatherwood was the one that I saw as kind of a splashy one. I was surprised to see him go, and I know that he struggled and he hasn't lived up to the hype of where he was drafted, but a guy who could maybe play tackle or guard, could you kick him inside? And potentially you're looking at a situation where next year this will be an issue that the Bucs will have to address in the offseason. Who's going to play left guard? That's going to be a problem, right? Ryan Jensen will come back, and maybe you can move Hainsey to guard. Stinney might be, depending on the rehab and everything like that, he might be back to full strength. But it's not like Stinney was the lock, stock, and barrel. He was in a competition with guys who, frankly, haven't played that well in the preseason. So I kind of feel like if you could get Leatherwood, granted there is some specificities within his contract that he would have to guarantee the future of his contract because he's on if you claim him from waivers. But he could be a short-term fix and a long-term fix simultaneously, which I think is interesting. So his name just kind of jumped off. But I would just say biggest concern to me is just consistently linemen because you can't go in. I feel like it's a tough position to go into the season with no depth, and our depth is getting dangerously thin, just getting run through a little bit, and it makes me nervous. Like we all remember last year what happened when Wells had to play when Tristan Wirfs got hurt in the playoffs, and Josh Wells looked like he was falling down a well. It was bad. So I saw Joe Hague, and it was like, all right, Joe Hague, that wouldn't surprise me. And then I saw Super Bowl with terrible special teams. So obviously they don't, as long as they got a kicker and a punter that they feel are good, they're not going to invest a lot of time and focus and energy into it. So it doesn't surprise me that just keeps falling by the wayside, even though it'd be nice. So offensive line depth to me would be right at the forefront.
Nevin, your thoughts here?
Yeah, the note on Leatherwood is basically if you were to claim him off of waivers, you take on his whole contract. There is no negotiating a new contract. That's the difference between releasing a player and waiving a player. And I've actually got this question a lot today. What's the difference between waiving and releasing? Releasing is you're a free agent and you can sign with any team right away. Waiving is you don't have a choice of where you go, and you don't even know where you're going until tomorrow at I think noon. I think that's the deadline when you'll figure that out. So in terms of Leatherwood, if the Buccaneers were to put in a waiver claim, and let's say the Buccaneers, it goes with the draft order. So the Buccaneers are 27th, so they're down there. And let's say no team claims and the Bucs have that claim in, they get him. But you also pick up his contract, and right now for this season, he has about an $8 million cap hit. So that's why I wouldn't expect them to put in a claim for him. Now, if he goes unclaimed through waivers, he becomes a free agent. Then he can sign with anybody. Then that's a different game because that can be a different cap hit. Clearly, there's some talent there. He really struggled with the Raiders. I mean, he was a first-round pick. He lasted 1 year. I mean, that's struggling.
It's crazy.
And yeah, it's, so it wouldn't shock me. I don't know if I would expect it just because they don't have Hainsey playing his natural position. They don't have Luke Gedeke playing his natural position, even though they're trying to make him a guard. They try to make Hainsey a center. Leatherwood has played in the NFL tackle, right? He played tackle at Alabama, played a little bit of guard, but I just think if they're going to go for depth, they're going to go for more experience. And Joe Hague is actually an interesting one. While I don't think Joe Hague is pretty good, I just don't think he's very good.
I agree.
The familiarity there does help.
Yeah,
that helps. And I mean, he hasn't played in a little bit, but Earl Watford's been campaigning on Twitter. I don't think that's going to happen, but just another name that's familiar with the system and everything. Sure. That's always a bonus, but I'm not sure. I think if they were to add anybody, it would likely be on the interior. It wouldn't be any starting level player. So if you're expecting a guy to come in and be like a starter, I wouldn't expect that. But I think they would like a veteran to be a backup because, just like you guys said, what happens if Hainsey were to go down or Gedeke were to go down? Billy, you mentioned next offseason maybe needing a left guard. I think, and the Bucs hope this too, they just put a second-round pick in Luke Gedeke. So you're hoping, even if he struggles a little bit, you're hoping he shows signs. And you also have to kind of almost feel bad for Gedeke because he's being thrown to the wolves here. This is, I don't think the situation that the Bucs expected. I think the Bucs expected Aaron Stinney to kind of run away with the left guard job and have Gedeke sit for a year. And now all of a sudden it's, Gedeke, you're the starting left guard on a team that's trying to win. So I think the hope is that he can show a bit more development. Then you won't have to worry about it. But mean, that may come up, and but I agree that O-line depth and maybe somebody to look. Just everybody's bringing up the O-line or whatever. I just want to bring up another position. Can they find maybe a better fifth corner than D. Delaney? Do you find an upgrade there that can play special teams? I don't know all the names that are out there right now, but and there's also, before these cuts, there were still a lot of free agents available anyway, so they can still sign any of them too. So there's a lot of options out there. It wouldn't surprise me if they do add somebody or even add a veteran to their practice squad. It's like I said, with the new rules, you can do that. So it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, when I think about guys that they could add, right? Practice squad included. Evan, you're gonna love this. Hey, bring back Josh Rosen. Why not? Bring him home. Bring my guy home.
It's gonna be Ryan Griffin for the gajillionth time.
Nah,
so.
Josh Rosen, Marlon Mack's available. Bring a USF guy home. Maybe practice squad, something along those lines. Sony Michel, former Patriots running back. Maybe he's a guy that could get a look. Justin Bethel was actually just released from the Patriots. He's a special teams guy that I think could provide.
That's one and that's all familiar. That's Arizona. Bruce Arians could, kind of advise on that one. I'm not sure if he crossed paths with Jason Light or not, but that's one maybe you could look out for. And Justin Bethel played for New England. I'm not sure if him and Brady crossed over either. So.
And another couple of guys, too, just in terms of the interior offensive line. I'm looking at a couple of lists now in terms of the people that other teams have cut. And I said this on Twitter earlier today. Austin Reiter of the Kansas City Chiefs. That is another guy. Started 38 games, I think, at center in the league. He's a guy, which I know the expectation is that he's going to sign back with the Chiefs practice squad or something along those lines. Hey, Buccaneers, maybe swoop in and say, hey, we'll give you a spot on our 53-man roster. Maybe as a backup center, something along those lines. You guys did mention Joe Hague. He's possibly an option in there as well. We'd have to wait and see. I like the idea of Alex Leatherwood if he does clear waivers. If not, obviously you don't want to pay a guy like that $8 million if he's not very good, of course. So I don't think it would only be a situation where if he clears waivers, that would be a really interesting situation. Josh Andrews of the New Orleans Saints, Nick Martin of the New Orleans Saints, a couple of backup veteran offensive linemen as well, who, like what you guys said, I think we're all in agreement, right? That, hey, veteran offensive linemen, that's probably the move at this point, They need some more experienced depth. I think all three of us have been saying this, right? When Hainsey goes down, you don't have, or not when, I shouldn't say when. if Hainsey goes down, you don't have an experienced guy, a guy who's started at center in the league for at least a little bit to kind of take that place. You have some undrafted guys, some guys who Buccaneers like their versatility, but no guys who've gotten live game action. And that's kind of the biggest difference there and the biggest thing that you got to get out of some of these guys. So that's what I think would be the biggest thing. And like you said, Evan, there's still guys out there who have that ability who just haven't been signed yet. So maybe this is something they may do. Maybe it's something they may wait on. I'm not sure. I could see them adding a couple of guys like that to their practice squad, at the very least, given his history with the Patriots, given his history with the Arizona Cardinals, among others. So kind of what are your guys' thoughts on that?
Sony Michel wouldn't shock me to be on the practice squad. There's obviously a familiarity with Brady. That's the biggest thing. That's why Sony Michel really wouldn't shock me. They might bring back Patrick Laird to the practice squad, but right now, doesn't seem like they only cut one running back, so it's not like they have a bunch to put on the practice squad. So Sony Michel could be that option. Possibly. Leonard Fournette dealt with a few injuries last year. It wasn't just one. Giovanni Bernard, really a lot of the time last year was missed due to injury. So, what happens there if both those guys go down? Then you're stuck with a rookie, Rashad Wyatt, and then Keyshawn Vaughn again. You could have a little bit more depth in Sony Michel.
Our guy Keyshawn Vaughn.
I know. I sneak, there. But I think those names could make sense. I'm sure you guys already brought this up, but I saw it in the chat one more time. So before you head out, since it's been a little bit probably since you talked about this, Logan Ryan was cut, but not really cut. he was cut. Technically he was released, but somebody said they weren't surprised that Ryan was cut. Well, he'll be back. About a 95% chance.
Who wants to tell
he'll
him?
Be back. Yeah, see, he will be back, and yes, and also there's a lot of in the chat. Yeah, OJ Howard is not coming back, so that's
No. To explain the OJ Howard situation real quick too, from what I've gathered from online, reporting and whatnot, it seems like it's a very similar situation where OJ Howard is going to be expected back with the Bills. So that's not necessarily going to be a situation where OJ Howard's going to make his triumphant return to Tampa and have a role with the Bucs again. Besides, they've already got 4 tight ends on this roster with Cam Brake, Kyle Rudolph, Cade Otton, and Keith. All those guys showcase some good things.
Oh, and I mean, when Gronkowski comes back in November,
right? When Gronkowski and Edelman come in November too, there's really not going to be any room.
Hey, yeah, Ed, you see the thing that Edelman said?
He said he's feeling really good and that he could come back. We're gonna be sitting here all season now going, hey, Edelman, how you doing? We joked about it, but now, it's just crazy, man. One more name I want to throw out there too from the New England Patriots is Henry Anderson, who also has a little bit of a history with
Todd Bowles.
Yeah, with Todd Bowles and I think Brady whenever they spend time together. He's another guy, if you want to add some veteran into your defensive line depth, Henry Anderson can be another guy in that mix as well. But
this 53 is not the final 53. That's
sure.
You have to get to 53. That's what today was. You had to get to 53. That doesn't mean you have to keep all 53 of these guys. I remember actually 2018, Will Clark had made the team. He was the defensive end. He had made the team. A few days later, the Browns put Carl Nassib on waivers. The Bucs picked up Carl Nassib off waivers and released Will Clark. It was, the 53-man roster was set, but then you have that move. So that's important to remember that this list of players, it may be different in 3 days.
Real quick, too, I did see somebody say in the chat asking, why did Carl Nassib make this roster? And I don't know many guys out there who love Carl Nassib. Billy, am I right here? I mean, whenever you talk about guys, just, geez, why did he make the roster? Billy, do you have anything to comment on regarding that?
Why did Carl make the roster? People don't like Carl. I'm not aware of this. People don't like Carl Nassib?
I think it was just one comment.
People are slept on? Carl Nassib is a very solid rotational edge rusher who in his 2 seasons with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers has provided 12.5 sacks. The only success I could say really for his entire career. Because the rest of his career with the Raiders and the Browns has not been nearly as effective. But in the Todd Bowles system and even in the Dirk Cutter-led attack prior to Todd Bowles coming, Carl Nassib was very effective in Tampa. And I would expect him to maintain a solid level of production as a rotational piece with Anthony Nelson.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just to put a final bow on this, and then there are a couple more things I want to talk about, but to put a final bow on this, like Evan said, folks, there's still going to be a lot of moves made throughout, today. Well, not today. Tomorrow.
Maybe. Anything can happen.
We're going to be here at like 1 a.m. making videos. We're going to be back here at 1 a.m., guys. We're going to be very tired. But look, there's still a lot of stuff to be done here between today, tomorrow, maybe even the day after. Like, a lot of different stuff's going to happen, man. So, like Evan said, this is just the initial 53-man roster, so pay attention to it. Let's see what else the Buccaneers continue to do. This is not set in stone. There's much fluidity towards the bottom half of a roster, folks, so let's just kind of all wait and see what happens throughout this process.
I think we all are in agreement about the potential backup offensive lineman, right? Adding a guy. I think the main fear is the offensive line this year becoming the cornerbacks of last year. Right. Last year, we've gone into games starting D. Delaney and Pierre Desir and Rashard Robinson's taking reps. And it's like, you can't have the offensive line equivalent of D. Delaney starting games blocking for Tom Brady.
Yeah. And to me, you can survive with the cornerbacks being like that. You can't survive with the offensive line being like that.
It'll be a killer if that winds up happening. So you can't let that happen.
Oh, absolutely. And, obviously we'll see what happens regarding all those moves. And just real quick, for everybody in the chat, we still got like 170 people in here, so thank you guys so much for that. We get to talk about probably the most joyous part, one of the most joyous things that happened today. Folks, the Saints traded Chauncey Gardner-Johnson to the Philadelphia Eagles. It's a blessed day. There's
an inside joke here between me and James. We'll let you in on it, I guess, because now we have to pull back the curtain because now it's time for celebration, I guess.
Yeah. Well,
the reason the Bucs can't beat the Saints is 3 players. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Those 3 players are at all 3 different levels of the defense.
Wait, can I guess them?
Yeah, go ahead.
Cam Jordan.
Okay.
Demario Davis.
Okay.
And C.J. Gardner-Johnson.
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah.
As long as all 3 of those players are on the Saints, the Bucs were never going to beat the Saints. And now the Bucs' chances of beating the Saints just went up because
by at least 33%.
Yeah. It's just the chances have gone up now because one of them is gone. So thank God. One of them is gone, and maybe like the one that talks the most trash. So
yeah,
the most annoying one is gone.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the trio from hell is gone. We appreciate that.
That's what we call them. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, admittedly, didn't even get traded for that much, man. What, a 5th round pick, kind of a pick swap type deal.
Yeah, I think Philly gave him a 7th, and I'm sorry, New Orleans got a 7th. No, New Orleans gave a 7th, and they got a 5th and a 6th back.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, hey, congrats to the Eagles. Thank God, hopefully we don't have to add Tyrann Mathieu to that trio now to replace Chauncey Gardner.
Brady owns Mathieu.
That's what we hope. And I think it will.
To the Super Bowl, he owns Mathieu.
Yeah, I know. So this is good news, right? But 2 other interesting things I want to talk about, or I guess one more interesting thing is Kellen Mond got waived today.
Yeah.
3 picks after Kyle Trask.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, he got waived, Devin, so I don't know what to tell you.
I still remember, if I could bring up a story, I still remember being on with you guys on draft night, and Evan, you were telling me about Kellen Mond, and I don't know, your guy, he's not on the team. I don't know, it's kind of weird.
He's waived right now, man.
Maybe the Bucs will pick him up. He can back up Trask in the future.
There you go.
Oh my God, I think my heart couldn't handle that. Handle that.
Yeah, to be fair, I didn't think like Kellen Mond was like all that great. I just thought he's better than Kyle Trask. Clearly he's not, because like to get waived after 1 year being he was a 3rd round pick, but he was basically a 2nd round pick because the Bucs picked Kyle Trask at the very last pick of the 2nd round, and then Davis Mills and Kellen Mond went like immediately after. Hindsight, the Bucs probably should have picked Davis Mills because they had the pick of all of them, and Davis Mills has actually looked decent. So they probably should have picked him, but Kellen Mond, waived. That was a surprise. That was a surprise. Also, I think the Vikings and the Cowboys are the 2 teams that currently have 1 quarterback on their roster. So they cut both of their backups each. So
It's pretty interesting, man. Just one more name I want to throw out there, by the way, that got cut today was Khalil Davis. He has a history with the Bucs, by the way. Could be a guy for a practice squad. Just to throw that name out there, but. Yeah, guys, it's been a fun live stream. We've gone for about an hour and a half now. I think we've pretty much covered all the moves that were made today. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
So I think we're going to go ahead and end off this live stream here. Folks, thank you guys for watching, by the way. I talked with Evan about this. Billy, I don't know if you know, but I did a poll here recently on the channel that talked about doing more live streams like this, kind of after a day's worth of content. We just kind of sit down and go through all the stuff that's been happening with the Bucs. I think I'm going to do more of this. Yeah.
I voted yes.
I voted no.
I voted against this, but okay.
I didn't want to do this. But, so guys, let us know in the chat. Do you guys like these kind of live streams? Let me know. Who knows? Maybe Evan and Billy can be my co-hosts, that I just kind of threw into this situation right now. But let us know what you guys think. It was a blast talking about this stuff. If you did enjoy, hey, hit the like button. And if you are new, go ahead and subscribe. Billy, we'll start with you. Before we go ahead and end off this live stream, do you have any final words?
Tyler Johnson, man.
He's speechless.
He's speechless about Tyler Johnson.
What the heck? My gosh, that's all I got. Scottie Miller, Tyler Johnson, Perriman, that whole situation just blew my mind today, honestly.
Yeah.
One thing I want to say, good value for the Bucs to essentially trade up in the draft with the Grant Stewart thing. I just want to throw that out there. Like, you're essentially trading up at the expense of a linebacker that I think you were going to cut anyway, because Fatukasi just just played better, and Stewart was injured, and then when he came in, he wasn't all that great. So I think pretty good value there. But yeah, you can find me on the Can of Fire podcast. You can find James there too. We haven't had Billy on. We'll have to have you on at some point.
Oh my God, I'd watch the heck out of that live stream.
All right. We'll definitely have to, if James is getting that excited. So find me a Can of Fire podcast. We're going to be doing our season predictions here shortly. Got a lot of things coming up for the season. So then find all my written work on BucsNation.com.
Absolutely. So guys, hey, thank you so much for watching this live stream. Hope y'all enjoyed. And as always, folks, we will see you in the next video or the next live stream, because guess what? We're going to be live streaming more now. But until then, and as always, guys, goodbye for now. Go Bucs. See you guys soon.